Meet Tyler Best, Nicholas Scantlebury, and Mikkel James. Three friends who host a show called the Golden Doors Conversations. They discuss topics that range from sports, politics, fashion, to school lunches. Nothing is off the conversation table. Join them on Thursday, February 24th at 5 p.m. as they discuss what it means to be young and Black in America. How did the past 2 years change their outlook? Their open chat line lets you, the viewers, join in on the conversation.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the premiere of Golden Doors Conversations. My name is Tyler, and I am currently a senior at Piscataway High School and also a Junior 100 ambassador. First off, I would like to thank everyone for joining us as we kick off the start of our very first discussion. Even though tonight's episode is on a webinar format, we are hoping to turn it into a podcast very soon. Just a little background info, Golden Doors is a youth-driven program that will discuss topics that are relevant to younger people of color like myself. From backyards to boardrooms, fashion to politics, these open conversations will allow for different perspectives and opinions from young adults. Moving forward, today's discussion will focus on being Black in America. You will hear the experiences from the three generations, starting with Congressman Rangel, President Enis, myself, and my friends, also Junior 100 scholars, Nicholas and Mikkel. Nicholas and Mikkel, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you from our guests and the audience. I'm Nicholas Hansberry, and I'm a junior at Oratory Prep, and I'm a second year Junior 100 scholar. And now I'd like to pass it on to Mikkel.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. My name is Mikkel, and I'm a senior in high school. And I'm also part of the 100 Black Men organization. And I also want to thank President Enis of 100 Black Men organization and also Congressman Rangel for being with us. Thank you.
Now I would like to introduce Congressman Rangel and read his bio. Charles B. Rangel, war hero, history-making congressman, master lawmaker. A founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus, he made history as the first African-American member of Congress to lead the powerful Ways and Means Committee. He served for 23 terms in the House of Representatives and was cited as the most effective lawmaker in the House, leading all of his colleagues in passing legislation. He was a prime contributor to President Obama's historic healthcare reform law. Growing up on the other side of the tracks on Lenox Avenue in Harlem, he was transformed from high school dropout to war hero after volunteering for service in the army during the Korean War. Wounded in an attack by waves of communist Chinese troops, he was awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star for valor after leading his surviving comrades from behind enemy lines. With the aid of the GI Bill, he earned degrees from New York University and St. John's University Law School. He began his public service as the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York and was later elected to the New York State Assembly. He went to Washington in 1971 to serve in the House after defeating the legendary Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Congressman Rangel is currently statesman in residence at the City College of New York for the City University of New York. Demonstrating his commitment to education, he created financial mechanisms to construct and rehabilitate public schools across the country. In Congress, following St. Matthew's teaching, he has been a stalwart champion for at least the least among us, advocating powerfully and persistently to improve the lives of working people. He is a defender of veterans and treated education as a national security issue. A leading advocate for equal rights and equal opportunity, Congressman Rangel boosted the incomes of millions of working families with the Earned Income Tax Credit and pumped billions of dollars into revitalization of communities across the nation, including Harlem. His unparalleled foreign policy record focused on Africa and the Caribbean. In 1986, Congressman Rangel sounded the death knell for apartheid in South Africa with the Rangel Amendment, which forced the largest U.S. investors to abandon the country. He created trading and investment opportunities for struggling nations in the Caribbean and Africa. In 2010, he successfully promoted vital investment incentives for earthquake-ravaged Haiti. Among his proudest achievements is founding the Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Program in the State Department in cooperation with Howard University. As of 2015, most of the 200 Rangel Fellows who completed the program were serving as the U.S. State Department Foreign Service officers in the U.S. embassies across the world. Congressman Rangel retired from the U.S. State Congress in 2016. Mr. Rangel resides with his wife Alma in Harlem, where he was born. They have 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren. And thank you for being here, Congressman Rangel, and it was lovely to introduce you.
Wow. Let me make it clear where you say I defeated Adam Clayton Powell. Adam Clayton Powell served our community and indeed the world, or indeed the country for 26 years. He had passed more legislation than I had. And at the end of his career, for a variety of legal reasons, he decided not to come back to Harlem and not to go to Washington. And so even though legally I defeated him at the polls, I feel more comfortable in saying I replaced him because my wife and I went to Bimini with the consent of the governor to try to get him to come back home, and he didn't do it. So I don't want to, the last thing I had on my political agenda was going south to Washington to the Congress. And so I just wanted to make it clear that I don't want to take anything away from the wonderful legislative record of Adam. Now, I think I will do better since it's very awkward looking into an iPad and not really seeing the size of the audience. And you have given a very lengthy connection with my background, born on the streets of Harlem. I didn't have any particular ambitions as a kid. Unfortunately, I didn't have anybody that had gone to college in my family, and I didn't know anybody that had gone. I didn't join the service for patriotic reasons. I was unemployable as a dropout, and there wasn't an ability to send home a check, as my brother had, being a World War II veteran. And I enlisted for 1 year, re-enlisted for 3 years. And as you pointed out, I came home pretty decorated, but without any education except how to kill people, how to put together a 155 mission on artillery, how to...
He's going to talk okay.
Who's that talking? I lost the picture of somebody there. So what I was going to suggest is that perhaps I could take questions and that would be better.
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, thank you, Congressman Rangel. I will now read the bio of President Enis of 100 Black Men Organization. President Enis serves as an outreach director for the African American constituency of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which stands for the AIPAC. During his tenure, President Enis has helped the AIPAC increase and maximize his advocacy presence in the Northeast region and the nation's capital. He oversees outreach intensifies by engaging, expanding, and existing relationships of the African American constituency to members of Congress and stakeholders. In this position, President Enis develops strategies and programs to advance the AIPAC policy priorities. Prior to joining the AIPAC, President Enis spent time with the BNY Mellon as vice president and their client engagement and business development division. He also spent nearly 10 years between his role at State Street Bank and Trust and Morgan Stanley Investment Management and Senior Client Service Association roles, working with national and international institutional clients invested in real estate, growth projects, and through separately managed accounts and pooled trusts, offshore funds, and mutual funds. He also instrumentally in the transition of reporting requirements between the two organizations and directly leading a team from Mumbai, India on this transition. President Enis currently serves as president of 100 Black Men organization. He has led various committees within the organization, including finances, gala, education, scholarships, members, and bylaws. He also currently serves on the board of the 1906 project, where he is instrumentally on the management of a 10,000 square foot building located in Queens, New York, which serves as a central hub for community-based organizations within the local community. President Enis is a life member of the Alpi Fraternity Incorporated. He holds a Master of Business Administration from Seton Hall University and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Economics from the State University of New York, University of Albany.
Thank you very much, Mikkel. Appreciate the introduction.
We will now begin our conversation on being Black in America. Thank you again, everyone, for coming and being here to have this conversation with us. I currently wanted to talk about the current event that took place in Bridgewater, New Jersey. I felt like the situation could have been handled a little bit differently with the young Black teen that was treated differently by the police. And it just showed you that racism still exists, still shows you that we still have a long way to go. And it's unfortunate, that as African Americans, we still have to experience this type of stuff and still have to keep fighting for our rights. And one of the things that have given me hope, especially when the George Floyd incident occurred, was seeing people protest, seeing people of all races, of all ages come together to protest. That gave me a lot of hope and optimistic about our future and where we were going. But we still have a long way to go in America. And the reason why I'm saying that, because, for example, an experience that I had, I go to predominantly white high school, and it hasn't always been easy. For example, one experience I had was where in my English class, we were reading a book, Kill the Mockingbird, and I'm sure all of you probably heard of it. And my teacher made a racist comment and said that African-American men were picking and bullying the white women as though like it was their fault, which was not true. And I was very outraged by it. I was upset, and I explained how offended I was and how that was not the truth, that how many African-American men, including women, were falsely accused, that they were killed and mind their own business. And it just shows you that in America, we still have a long way to go, and we still have injustices. And the reason why we're having this conversation, to have everyone share their experiences and their thoughts on being Black in America. And I would like to ask Congressman Rangel if he can share his experiences and his thoughts on being Black in America.
One of the advantages and disadvantages of being born in Harlem was that as a kid, I never came into contact with white folks. I don't even know now whether I've ever met a white Southerner in Harlem. And when I was in the military, I was in a segregated Black outfit. When I was in Korea, It was a segregated black outfit. When we did get white replacements, the question was getting along with them or the people shooting after us. And so I really never understood the depth of the hatred that white folks had for us until I got out of law school and joined the freedom fighters down in the South. And not having the benefit of going to a historic black college as my beautiful wife had, I really thought that this Constitution meant me too. But when you take a look at it, we weren't even considered human beings. Lincoln was more concerned about preserving the Union than he was about freeing the slaves. And quite frankly, it gave white America a preference that has existed since the Emancipation Proclamation. And what we're going through now is one of the most honest reviews of the history of this country, the genocide of the people that lived here, the other mistakes have been made, and to recognize that I still think that there's no other country I want to be in, but we are going to have to remove the stigma of slavery, prejudice from this country if we're going to survive as a nation. And what we saw on November the 6th was a tribute to Trump pulling the sheets off of the racism in this country and allowing you to see it with your own eyes, what we as a country have to overcome. And so we have to overcome this heavy prejudice that we're faced with. And there is opportunities, but it's a heavy lift.
Thank you, Congressman Rangel, for your feedback. Now, I would like to ask President Enis if he can share his experiences and his thoughts on being Black in America.
Absolutely. So first off, Mikkel, thank you very much for those remarks and sharing your experiences as far as being a young Black man in America. As you know, things change in the world. You also see how things remain the same, right? So some of the stories that the congressman had, spoken about, as far as him growing up in Harlem, some of those experiences I've had growing up in Queens, New York, in the 80s and 90s, and unfortunately, you're seeing the same of that. So although things continue to change, things continue to remain the same. For me, I may have a slightly different outlook and perspective, and everyone will, right? And although we're Black, we all have our own nuances and how we view the world. So for me, I grew up in a Caribbean household, and I went to a school from first grade to eighth grade, which was very diverse. And at the time, I didn't realize how diverse that school was. So I just looked at the world from that lens. It was more of a kaleidoscope in the sense of, we had kids that were, of African parents. You had kids of Caribbean parents, Filipino, Latino. We had a couple of, Caucasians. So it just ran the gamut. And as we got older, we just, we remained friends. So it really wasn't until high school that I saw a clear difference between the Black kids and the white kids who attended the school. So the school became like very segregated. But once again, because of where I came from first to eighth, I saw, I was able to to go between both groups. The white kids, I had friends there. The Black kids, I had friends there. Caribbean kids had friends there. So my upbringing had a lot to play in how I view the world. What I'm sad to see, though, is how these things are being shown, and how people are really experiencing a whole host of issues to the detriment of Black folks, right? And in particular, Black men, and this fear of us, and unfortunately, our masculinity, our skin tone is being weaponized. So sometimes, you're viewed more as a danger depending on how dark you are, right? Versus our fair-skinned brothers and sisters, right? So there are so many challenges that we deal with. But what I love about this is that, we have young men in our Junior 100 program who are hosting this podcast. So we're tapping into the minds of young folks in hopes to change this trajectory, right? You guys are our future. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with you guys. The congressman and I will tell you about our experiences in hopes that you'll be able to change some of the ills that are affecting Black folks in America.
Let me interject here. One of the greatest things that I've seen as an adult was the creation of the 100 Black Men, because I didn't say it directly, but all I needed was a mentor. All I needed was someone to feel comfortable in asking the question to. And I didn't have that. And so many kids all over this country have enough pride that they don't know who to ask the questions that are simple. And the mentorship program of the 100 Black Men is so important. And what you young people are doing is you're just saying, I know a lot, but I want to know a heck of a lot more. And the fact that members of the 100 Black Men and those of us in public service, we get such a great satisfaction in being able to help somebody to improve the situation in a country that we love. But there's so many prejudices, issues that you're right. And, you mentioned skin tone. How can you teach somebody not to like himself because of his color, and at the same time tell him he's made in God's image? The whole thing is a myth that has been created in order to have white folks figure that they are superior and they deserve preferential treatment. But worse than that is to have Black folks who feel that they can't cut it because of their color. I think we've come a long, long way since Marcus Garvey, but we're not entirely there yet. And so the more of these conversations, the more that what we used when we were in Memphis and other places fighting for freedom, I said, I am somebody. And it's more than just a saying. It makes you feel better when you know it and believe it.
All right.
I scared everyone away.
All right. Very good.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to congratulate you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of the job that you're doing. We never thought that from our concept and forming it could become a national organization. And when I see the pride in young people stopping me in the various cities that I'm attending, and say, you don't know me, but I'm a part of 100 Black Men. It is something that makes you feel good. So young people, take a gamble on older folks and just say, can I ask you a question? And we enjoy being there for you.
So we thank you for sharing your experiences. We'd also like to encourage our audience to, ask questions in the chat so that all of us can answer some of your questions too. So please do that.
Now, Congressman Rangel, I wanted to highlight something that you just said. So you were talking about how the white man was using their race or their superior race as a way to justify the different things that they're doing. I've read before that they've been using race to justify their reasons for slavery, using us as a downtrodden race almost. How do you feel about that?
Well, I was honored to speak at the memorial service for Bishop Tudu, and what he had said was that when the white missionaries went to Africa, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bibles. But when they closed their eyes to pray and they opened up, it turned out that the missionaries had the Bible, the missionaries had the land, and the Africans had the Bible. And so it's no question, if you take a human being, as we did, and take away his culture, his pride, his language, his identity, and dehumanize him, you're really harming not just the body with the terrorism involved in slavery, but you are bothering the mind. And to a large extent, that's what President Enis was saying, that we have to overcome that ourselves. But the country loses a lot. And I'm just talking about in terms of social losses, but we lose a lot as a nation by carrying the burden of prejudice, because we have Russia, we have China, we have other countries that have their problems. But if we're going to be solid, we cannot afford to have this internal racial problem in the United States. And the major problem has been over the 400 years that we have ignored it and we haven't addressed it. And so when one of the young men talked about George Floyd and the hope that he had, young people have not been indoctrinated to know what they saw was murder with someone in a uniform that represented the community and the country. And we saw that outburst. But we haven't heard from the white churches. We haven't heard from the synagogues. We haven't heard from the mosque and the other people that believe that this is not just political, it is moral. And just as we worship Jesus and other people worship Allah, all of these religions should want social justice for all of us. And if they were to whisper this in the United Nations, I think we would hear a roar of support internationally as nations try to bully other countries.
Well, in listening to your question, Nick, we have to remember that Black history, our history, does not start with slavery, right? And I think all too often, that kind of becomes the starting point. But Africans had a history way before that, right? And we're talking about a very rich cultural history, right? And even some of the things that we do now, in 2022, a lot of it comes from our lineage to Africa. Although several of us have not visited the continent, right? So when you talk about music, some of the foods that we eat, the drum patterns in hip hop or in R&B, the way that we dance and celebrate life, that didn't start, 400 years ago, right? These are some of the mechanisms, the tools that, our African ancestors passed down to us throughout those years. These are the tools that they use to survive, right? So if you can imagine, being tortured for, 12 hours a day, in the hot sun, toiling the soil and raising crops and not being given enough food or shelter or clothing, right? How do you mentally survive that? So we always have to remember that we are a resilient people. But even in that, and knowing that, there's that mental trauma that has been passed on to us from generation to generation to where we are now. So don't ever believe that your history starts at slavery. What I implore upon you guys is to go deeper, right? And I'll give you an example. So for me, I knew that the cargo ship that brought my ancestors to the Caribbean to the island of Haiti. There was more beyond that, right? So I did a DNA test to kind of figure out, okay, what's my genetic makeup, and I was able to kind of like find the origin of my ancestors. And what that did was that gave me a certain level of pride and wanted to research, these countries, research these ethnic groups, learn more about them, what types of foods they're eating, and kind of compare that to what I eat today. But that history is so rich and so deep that there is more to you than the plight of your immediate ancestors. You come from descendants of royalty, and you always have to keep that in your mind that although there are these burdens that you have to deal with today, but your ancestors come from something very beautiful, and they can never take that spirit away from you.
Thank you, President Enis. I wanted to touch on something you said in there. So you were referring to how our Black history doesn't start at slavery, and I'd like to go beyond that. So I was able to have the great experience of going to Ghana this summer, and one thing I realized is, as my mom's Caribbean and my dad's also Caribbean, I really was able to feel some of the same things, like the food, the music, the dance that you would see in the Caribbean, and I was able to see that in Ghana, and that really got me to think, these could be my people. And say Black Americans, they really don't know past from slavery. They just know that they started out in Georgia or Tennessee or whatever. They're not able to have their heritage, and that really messes with mine, in my opinion. What do you think, Mikkel?
I have to agree with Nick. From coming from a parent, my mom from the Caribbean as well too, that have Caribbean roots, and being able to understand where you come from, your heritage, your culture, knowing that, like you said, President Enis, that our history doesn't just start from slavery, but it goes way back to Africa, to so many of the great things that we have done, that and so much that we have accomplished, and getting to know our history, getting to know more of our culture, not just within America, but even in back home in Africa, and even where some of our parents are from, like the Caribbean and other countries as well. So I absolutely agree.
And
Tyler.
yes, so if I may add, one of the things I'd like to jump off from that you said, President Enis, is talking about how where our history starts 400 years ago. And I think one of the problems with that is that, in terms of like my experience and growing up being a Black young man in the school system, is that we learn from like an early age that that's where it starts. It starts with like triangular trade. It starts off with the being shipped back and forth, to the Americas. It starts off with the colonies and colonization. And we're not really, I think where we lack in education is that we're not really taught, like the richness of our culture beforehand, like you were saying. And so we're kind of brought up in this environment in which we think it starts off just with slavery, and how we kind of have to search for our own in where our culture lies. And, I've had to do the same in terms of finding, like, getting an ancestry test and finding where I'm originally from, because for most of my life, I've asked, the question, where are we from? Like, not America, but like, where are we from? And so I wanted to know for myself where I was from. And so it turns out, like when I did the DNA test, I was 30% Nigerian. And so it kind of gives you a sense of like identity and sort of like a feeling of like, this is where I come from, I'm able to, relate to a certain group of people, or this is where I belong and stuff like that. But it definitely lies in the problem that there is a bit of information, well, not a bit, a huge part of history that is missing from the education system in terms of history. So yeah, I think that has been a problem within growing up being Black in America. And then I'd also like to ask you, for most of my life, I've grown up in a diverse community and I grew up in a diverse school. So I wanted to know how you said that there was sometimes there's separation within the school where African Americans were in groups. So growing up in that diverse school system, do you think that helped your experience growing up being Black in America? Or it, changed your
Going to
experience?
going to a diverse school versus, I would say yes, right? And the reason why I say that is you should always be very proud of where you are. But there's also something very special about learning about other cultures, right? I would never say that, we are the best people, right? I think there's so many beautiful pieces that we can take from different cultures that we should all celebrate. I think the issue is when we try to squash people's cultures and identities and not celebrate them. I think that's when we come into some real issues. So for me, the school that I went to was very strict, and I hated it at the time. But what it did for me was it gave me structure that is now applicable to me being an adult and also how I view the world. So I'm more about celebrating diversity, celebrating culture, knowing that there's more to a person than just by what you see and how that person looks. But with education, you cannot solely rely on our school system for your education, right? Education starts at the home, right? So if your parents are, providing you with the information and the knowledge, the sustenance that you need to be a holistic human being, wonderful. If they're not, you have to seek out those opportunities, right? What I also suggest is for those who may have grown up in a diverse home or school system, you always want to try to identify with your roots. So, I support fraternities, obviously, and that's a way for you to really connect with like-minded men, especially if you choose to join a Black Greek letter fraternity once you're in college or beyond. It allows you to gain more information, right? As you grow and become adults, you will circle yourself with folks with like minds. There's a saying that says, if there are if you're around four thieves, guess what? You're the fifth thief, right? So that basically means that you're going to surround yourself around people who are like you. But that also means that you have the opportunity to search out mentors, to search out people who you want to emulate, right? You may want to emulate someone like the Honorable Rangel, right? So how do you kind of get into his circle, although, there's a disparity in age, right? You seek him out as a mentor. You have these type of conversations, and don't be afraid to engage with people. So that's another reason why I love the Junior 100 program, and I love what you guys are doing with this podcast, and always, continue to do the work.
So let me add to that. President Enis pointed out that you shouldn't rely on the education and the school system to find out who you are and who your forefathers were. The truth of the matter is that a part of the slavery was to make certain that in this country you would never find out. They made it appear so unattractive that you didn't want to know. I'm embarrassed to have to admit that when I was going to PS 89, which is right across the street from where I live, I thought that Tarzan was the man in Africa. Because we did not have anyone that had anything complimentary to say about Africa, because they wanted to dehumanize the slaves. And so even today, the stigma when African descendants was trying to get away from the fact that they were Africans, because when I was a kid, included in the words of insulting each other was, man, you ain't nothing but an African. And of course, we're beyond that today. But the struggle we're having today is that the South and the bigots and the racists don't want to bring back the fairness in sharing what American history is. You know, the natives that were here, they were not discovered by some Italians. They were here. They weren't bothering anybody but themselves. They had a culture that is almost eradicated. And certainly when we talk about people that came here that didn't have color, they didn't deny the things that they can brag about that came from the European aspect of their life. And I should say that with my Irish friend and Jewish friends, how they can become better Americans, because in addition to being a patriot here, they know these wonderful stories that some are true, some are made up about Ireland and their relatives and their successes. And of course, Israel, that God decided that they were chosen. And so there is a sense of making you a better person wherever you are, if you can find out more about where you came from. And so you bet your life it didn't start with slavery. But I just want to add, they wanted to cut out everything that made a person proud that came here on those boats.
Yeah, and it's who controls the narrative, right? You know, the folks who wrote, you know, the history of African Americans, they control that narrative, right? So they put in those books what they wanted you to know about your history. So that's like me telling, you know, Nick about his ancestry or, you know, his family history, and, you know, him doing the same for Tyler, right? We have to be able to control our own narratives. We have to be able to seek out, you know, the quote unquote truth. And, you know, I implore you all to travel. It is a beautiful globe out there. There's more to this world than, you know, New York City, although it's probably the best city in the world. But, you know, there's so much to learn from going to Africa, right? Going to Asia, going to Europe, South America, and seeing how people live and truly having respect for their culture. And it's one of those things where if you're able to go to these countries and interact with folks and really appreciate it and honor their societal laws, right? I think sometimes when we as Americans go to these places, we think that we're the boss, we're in charge. When you go to these places, you have to respect their cultural norms, respect their laws, and really embrace these people and have real dialogue with them. And I think at that point, we as Americans, as African Americans, Black Americans, will be able to work in harmony with a lot of people and also change what's going on in America.
Yes, I totally agree, and I appreciate your thoughts. I would like to get to some of the questions that we have in the chat so we're able to answer some of these. So we have a question from Stephen Smart, and he asks, what are some of the ways banks can assist in closing the wealth gap? He also says he lives in Harlem.
Wow. So that's a really interesting question. How can banks help? Um, so banks have these predatory um, ways of giving out financing to folks, depending on how much money you make, depending on your ethnicity, things of that nature. And unfortunately, Black folks, in comparison to their white counterparts, were getting worse mortgages, for example, right? So where same history, making the same amount of money, same educational background, that white person would probably get a 3% loan, whereas that Black person would get 5%, right? So almost viewing him as more of a risk in the bank getting its money. I think one of the ways that that can be changed is for banks to have more people of color in their C-suite, more people of color in on their boards, but more importantly, more Black people, right? Because sometimes when we use the word color, they can add anyone who's not white, and that person may not have a Black person's best interest at heart. Um, so I think initially that's some of the ways of doing it. And sometimes you have to shame them, right? You have to let them know that they have these rules that are to the detriment of Black folks. And sometimes you have to galvanize your folks to maybe not do business with them. I'm a strong believer in if you really want change, you got to hit people in their pockets, right? It's one thing for me to be like, okay, Nick, yeah. But if Nick is affecting my money, there's a whole different conversation that needs to be had, right? So I'm more inclined to listen to what he has to say if he's affecting my bottom line.
Thank you, President Enis. Congressman Rangel, what is your idea about that?
Actually, the roots of racism is so deep in this country, and legislation and penalizing can sometimes be a deterrent. But as President Enis said, when a country is motivated under capitalism for profits, doing the right thing and the moral thing doesn't even get on the list. And they can just redline areas that they're not going to give fair treatment to. That is why it is so important that when we decide as a nation that we got to cut the cancerous sore of racism out of the country to make us stronger, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's community help, whether it's pride, whether it's productivity, whether it's the ability to do more things, all of these things coming together are going to be necessary, because as long as a person can profit from these racist things, some of these people are going to practice it, and you can't get them all just by law and the penal system and civil sanctions. And so rather than pick one of the areas that we have really been punished by, I would rather say that we got to change this country's way of thinking. And Biden would not have been president had it not been for Black folks led by Congressman Jim Clyburn. And when he said that when Joe Biden said that when he was losing as a candidate, Black folks in this country had his back. And now, as it relates to voting rights and civil rights, that he will have our backs. Well, that's something we're going to have to make certain it's going to work.
Thank you, Congressman Rangel. I do agree that there are many other methods that we have to try besides legislative reasoning to uproot the racism that has been institutionalized We do have another question, which I would like to get to, and I think you all should have a lot to say about. So this question comes from Phil Britton. He asked, do you think Black History Month is more for Black people to celebrate and learn more about our history, or more for others to learn about who we are?
I actually, it's for me, it's a combination of both, right? But Black history should not only be celebrated for 28 and maybe 29 days, depending on whether or not it's a leap year. We have such a rich history. How do you just contain it, for just a month, right? The same way that, we pretty much celebrate, white history 365. But some of the issues of why America is the way that it is right now is because so many of us live in bubbles, right? So a white person that's living in the middle of Kentucky somewhere, why would they care about Black history, right? They may not even have a Black neighbor or have any Black kids that attend their schools. So to them, it's irrelevant. And the same holds true if they don't have an Asian person or a Latino person that they are truly connected with. So for me, Black history just goes beyond just a month. And for my white counterparts, it would behoove them to learn more about Black history. And as the congressman mentioned, our current president, he's president because a Black man stood up for him, right? And encouraged other Blacks to vote for him, right? So there needs to be a better symbiotic relationship between all people. And what I love about New York City is that you have all of these ethnic groups. I don't know if the term is still used, but the melting pot in New York City. So why are we not taking advantage of this, right? Do we have Asian friends? Do you have Latino friends? Do you have white friends? Do you have Jewish friends? Do you have Muslim friends, right? Because it goes beyond race, it goes into religion as well. How can we become more harmonious with each other? So the same way we as Black folks or people in the New York City public school system have been forced to learn about white history, whether it's a cotton gin or whatever it is, they should be learning about Native American history, Latino history, Black history, Asian history. We all win if we know more about each other.
I can't add to the eloquent response of President Enis, but I know that we hope one day we'll be able to say as a country, it's just not needed. However, legislatively, instructors have to remind people that it is a day, and it allows us to focus on a problem that many people in the white majority find it uncomfortable. And as John Lewis said, that a part of our job is to make people feel uncomfortable if they're doing the wrong thing, and to make trouble, to make good trouble, and never give up, never give out, and never give in. And I like to say that people have died for the right to vote. And it really hurts me after all the time that I spent in the South to see what we are fighting against. And again, I compliment Trump for bringing this slime from under the rocks. They come with their spears and their hatred and against us, against Jews, against other people. And you mean to tell me that there are people who are saying, what difference does it make? We can add a Black woman to the United States Supreme Court and be able to say that I kind of think that she understands the problems that I have in this country. And so I'm not giving a plug to Democrats or Republicans. I'm just saying you should be able to talk about these things and how it affects our people. And from the time you're born to the time you die, it's all political in between. And lastly, I'd like to say is that I don't know how white Christians can justify maintaining the most segregated hour in America, and that's Sunday morning, with their white racist teachings from the time of slavery to even today in these evangelistic places that I wish we heard more from other established religions about just not black and white, but what is moral and just.
Thank you for your thoughts, Congressman Rangel. Sadly, we are coming to a close on our program. I would like to ask President Enis and Congressman Rangel if you can give your closing remarks.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you guys are doing such an amazing job. I just can't wait to see what becomes of this podcast and future podcasts. I know that this is just the beginning, but I urge you all to continue to get mentors, continue to expand your education beyond your school books. Don't be afraid to learn. Learning is a process that continues beyond your master's degree, your PhD. You are consistently learning and growing as a human being. And never forget that. I also say travel as much as you can. It's not as expensive as some people may think, but the most important thing is to get your passport. I think once you have that passport, and the American passport is a beautiful thing. So despite some of the ills that we may have in this country, that American passport will allow you to visit so many countries in this world so that you can get a better understanding of what makes up humanity. I always tell my members of the 100, continue to be safe, continue to wash your hands, keep your mask on. We're still in a pandemic. Continue to love on your family, your friends, and be kind to each other. Thank you.
I can't add to that at all, but
Sure,
I do want.
Come on.
I do want to say is that one of the things that I felt as a kid on Lenox Avenue is that I never wanted people to know just how dumb I was. I was always afraid, and I did not know who to ask questions from. And as I grew up, I found out that a lot of different races, the family forces you to ask questions to make you feel that you're somebody. They start as a matter, this is your life, know who you are, know what you want to do, know that we're there for you. And most importantly, have that fraternity of feeling comfortable and encouraging other people who know less than you to talk with you about it. A lot of kids that are out there breaking the law, belonging to gangs, it's because there's no place that they feel that they can go to feel comfortable. And as they recruit each other to do these things, to feel a sense of togetherness, a lot of kids should be doing what you guys are doing and just asking the questions of them. And you will be surprised how anxious they are for someone to really talk with them. They just don't want to ask and be turned down. So keep doing what you're doing. Try to enlarge it. Join fraternities, join groups that are talking about these things. Get political and ask people political questions. Make certain you have some kind of answer and know what they're answering. But being involved is the most exciting part of life. Giving up is easy to do. And we say in poker that you can't win unless you're in. And so what John Lewis would say, don't give up, don't give out, don't give in. You got to make it.
Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate you, President Aldrin Enis and Congressman Rangel, for taking the time out of your schedules to come and join in our conversation. I know for myself, and I can say the same for Nicholas and Mikkel, that we have taken a lot from this discussion. And although we do have to come to an end and wrap it up, I would like to thank everyone for coming. We appreciate you taking the time to listen and hope that this conversation has provided you with some insight or helped you gain a new perspective. I would also like to add that you can currently follow us on our Junior 100 Instagram page. That is JR100_100 Black Men for more updates on upcoming conversations. And now I'm going to hand it off to Nicholas.
I would just like to thank the audience and President Enis and Congressman Rangel for getting on this meeting with us today and just allowing us to have this conversation with you. It was very insightful, as Tyler said before, and it was just great to have you here. And I'd also like to thank the audience for engaging in this conversation with us, asking questions. We want this feedback from the audience so we could know what we want to talk about on this meeting. And I'll pass it on to Mikkel.
Thank you, Nick. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. I wanted to thank, again, President Enis and Congressman Rangel for being a part of our conversation and sharing their experiences and thoughts. Thank you, Pace University and guests, for doing this with us. And we look forward to seeing everyone next Golden Door conversation we have. Thank you to the Junior 100 organization. Thank you to the Executive Director, Courtney, and thank you to everyone for coming, and we look forward to having us again.
Meet Tyler Best, Nicholas Scantlebury, and Mikkel James. Three friends who host a show called the Golden Doors Conversations. They discuss topics that range from sports, politics, fashion, to school lunches. Nothing is off the conversation table. Join them on Thursday, February 24th at 5 p.m. as they discuss what it means to be young and Black in America. How did the past 2 years change their outlook? Their open chat line lets you, the viewers, join in on the conversation.